Thank you, Mr. Chair. Important hearing. Thank you all for being here. I want to ask about gaps of a different kind. I want to talk to you about discipline. One of the requirements in ESSA was that states would have to describe how the state will support local educational agencies receiving assistance to improve school conditions for student learning, including through reducing, quote, the overuse of discipline practices that remove students from the classroom. Often, discipline practices have been utilized in ways that are highly discriminatory, especially against minority students. Mm-hmm. And kids then absorb that lesson, and they think they're going to get in trouble more likely than their peers, and that affects their learning. I would hope you might each take a minute, if you would, and tell me in your states just what you are trying to do to review and utilize data on school discipline to make sure that we are not penalizing historically underserved students. And then maybe, Mr. Jeffries, you could talk about it from the perspective of a national perspective. Do you think DOE and the states are doing enough to reduce disparate uses of discipline? Thank you.
I'm very proud of the work that we've done in South Carolina. In my first year of office, we held a task force to look at our student discipline templates, the training of resource officers, and to really address the issue of the pipeline to prison. And I think we have adequately made some changes. And then this past year, our General Assembly also passed new legislation on disrupting schools to clarify that. We are working now to get those into regulation. I'm very pleased with the progress that we've made. And again, we also, in our ESSA plan, from our stakeholders, heard that parents wanted to know about student climate. And that's why we have included that as one of our indicators, where students will be telling us how they feel about the safety inside their schools. So we're looking forward to that information being on our report card.
Great, thank you. Ms. Bunting.
Again, I can echo much of what has been said, but I'll add to it that we are very concerned about some of the disproportionate figures that we have analyzed. We do watch data very closely in Delaware, and then we have full conversations and expect actions to reduce gaps or to remove the disparities. But I think our efforts this year, and I'm very proud, as I mentioned, of our staffs moving forward with such training as ACEs for adverse childhood experiences and understanding what an impact that would make in a classroom, and for trying such things as responsive classroom techniques and compassionate schools. So we're working at it from the understanding perspective as well, and offering alternatives that are not ones that involve suspension and expulsion at times. We can't teach students if they're not there with us.
Absolutely. Mr. Blumstead.
Yeah, so in Nebraska, we've had, I think, really serious conversations about how to do this. And we actually had a couple instances where we were enforcing the prior, even in the, before ESSA passed, the prior law, and how that was addressed. And I wasn't in a position necessarily, we'd get into a battle with a particular school district. And I said, let's lay out a plan that's going to make a particular difference for your students. Let's think about trauma-informed. Let's think about culturally responsive practices within your schools. And I've walked hallways in some of our schools where kids are outside the classroom for something as simple as, crinkling a water bottle or something like this. And I'm going, this is absurd. We need to be ensuring that our students in our classrooms, that the discipline should not be removing their opportunity to learn. It should be a conversation about creating that climate and culture that's appropriate. And so our efforts have really turned to that approach, different than the traditional compliance, bang somebody over the head with their numbers, but more about what are our strategies that are going to really make a difference, and then track the numbers on accountability.
Excellent. And Mr. Jeffries, address it from the national level and things that we should pay attention to as we're exercising oversight over the DOE's efforts in this regard.
Thank you, Senator. We think it's critical for Congress to, again, demand the data. Folks are very well-intentioned throughout the country. They're really trying to do the right thing. But the proof is in the pudding. And we continue to see throughout this country, particularly with low-income kids, and even more so particularly low-income kids of color, we continue to see disproportionate discipline, disproportionate suspensions, disproportionate expulsions for the same types of activities that white students, upper-income students are receiving different sort of reactions to. We've gotten reports even recently of African-American students in certain school districts being sent home because they didn't have a belt on and there was a certain uniform policy. These sort of practices fundamentally contravene the equity mandates of ESSA. We absolutely need more of the trauma-informed and restorative justice practices. The absolute last resort for any school district, particularly a school district that receives Title I funds, should be to send a baby home. right? So if a child makes a mistake, kids are going to make mistakes. I have 2 kids. I could never imagine if my kids make a mistake and say,
Don't get me started.
and say, I'm going to kick you out the house, right? You didn't do your homework. You didn't do what me or your mom asked you to do. We're going to kick you out the house. Go outside, and we'll figure out when we're going to let you back in. So the idea that we would kick babies out and send them back into the community is simply ridiculous. And in fact, we just saw a study of a kid who was sent home and who actually was murdered on the way back home. And so particularly when we have kids coming from communities filled with difficulty and trauma, and the school is their oasis to get away from that. So clearly we need Congress to demand data to make sure that schools and states are doing the right thing.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Chair. I think I'll ask a follow-up for the record as well about some of the best practices that you mentioned, from legislation, compassionate schools, to some of the programs that you mentioned, and get some best practices from you that might be helpful for the committee. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Kaine. Senator Murray.